Dad, we've decided Christmas this year is just for our little family. You're not part of that anymore. That's what my son texted me on December 18th, 2 weeks before Christmas. Then his wife got on the phone and said I'd have to earn my way back into their lives. I told them both, calmly, that I understood completely. Then I opened my bank's app and started canceling everything. 4 hours later, I had 73 missed calls. The text arrived at 2:14 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. I was sitting at the kitchen table in my house in Waterloo, Ontario, going through end-of-year paperwork for my accountancy clients. December was always busy. Numbers everywhere, tax deadlines, RRSP contributions to track. I had my reading glasses on, 2 mugs of coffee at different stages of cooling, and the particular silence of a house that has been a single man's house for 6 years. I remember looking at the message for a long time before I understood what I was reading. My son, I'll call him by what he is, my son, had written it in a group chat that included his wife. No preamble. No, hey Dad, we need to talk. Just, this year Christmas is for our little family. You're not part of that anymore. 7 words that canceled 6 years of everything I had quietly kept going. Before I could type a single letter back, my daughter-in-law added her own message. She wrote that perhaps if I learned to respect their boundaries and their parenting choices, I might eventually earn a place at their holiday table again. Earn, as if 64 years, as if raising the boy alone after his mother left, as if every dollar I had sent and every hour I had given had added up to a balance that somehow still came out negative. I took my glasses off. I set them on the table beside the nearest coffee mug. I am a chartered professional accountant. I have spent 4 decades looking at numbers with exactly the kind of precision that does not lie to you. Numbers do not have feelings. They do not soften the truth or rearrange it to protect you. They simply tell you what is there. So I picked up my phone, went to my notes app, and I started listing what was actually there. The mortgage on the semi-detached they rented in Guelph, $1,850 a month. I had been covering it since they moved in 3 years ago, when my son changed jobs and said they just needed a few months to stabilize. My daughter-in-law's car, a 2022 Subaru Forester, leased in my name because her credit history was not strong enough, $487 a month. My son's phone plan and his wife's phone plan, because they had stayed on my family account from the days when he was in university, and neither of us ever changed it, $140 a month. My grandchildren's winter sports registration, hockey for my grandson, figure skating for my granddaughter, because my son had asked if I could cover it just this year while they got settled, and just this year had turned into 3 winters, $320 a month prorated. The private tutoring my daughter-in-law had arranged for my grandson without asking me first, and then mentioned casually, like it was already understood I would cover it, $280 a month. I sat with the total for a moment. $3,077 a month, $37,000 a year. In 3 years, that was more than $110,000, not counting the $12,000 I had given them directly when they bought furniture for the Guelph house, the $4,000 I had sent when my daughter-in-law's mother visited from out of province, and they wanted to take her to Niagara, the $6,500 I had contributed to my grandson's hockey equipment over the years, because the gear kept getting more expensive, and my son kept mentioning it around the time his credit card bills came due. I said the total aloud in my empty kitchen. The number hung in the air like a question I had been afraid to ask for 3 years. Then I looked at the message again. Earn a place at their table. I went to my phone's banking app first. The mortgage payment was set up as a pre-authorized debit through my checking account, scheduled for the 1st of every month to the property management company that handled the Guelph rental. I navigated to the pre-authorized payments section, found it, looked at the little green active indicator beside the amount, canceled it, just like that. The green turned to a grayed out status and the word pending removal appeared beside it. Then the Subaru lease. That required logging into the CIBC auto finance portal because the lease was technically mine. It took me 4 minutes to find the right page, enter my credentials, and navigate to account management. There was a button that said Terminate Lease Agreement. There was a note beside it warning that early termination fees would apply and that the vehicle would need to be returned. I clicked it. I filled out the form. I submitted it. My son called during the car lease termination process. I watched his name appear on my screen. I set the phone face down on the table and finished what I was doing. The phone plan was next. I had set up the family account years ago when my son started university. I logged into my Rogers, found the account, and removed his number and his wife's number. Both lines would be deactivated within 24 hours. I received an email confirmation before I had even closed the app. The tutoring was a separate company, a learning center in Guelph, that my daughter-in-law had enrolled my grandson in and put my credit card on file for. I called their billing number directly. Explained. I was the card holder and wished to remove my payment method from the account effective immediately. The woman on the other end was very professional about it. She confirmed it was done. The sports registrations were through the local recreation association. Their payment portal allowed cancellation of the pre-authorized monthly amounts. Cancelled. By the time I finished, my son had called 11 times. His wife had called 4. There were 8 text messages in the group chat that I was no longer reading. I went to the window. Outside, it was one of those gray December afternoons that Ontario does so well. No drama, no snow yet. Just the low, dull sky pressing down on the subdivision streets and the bare maple tree in the front yard that had been there since before I moved in. I had bought this house after my mother died and left me a small inheritance. 3 bedrooms, more than I needed. But I had told myself there would be grandchildren visiting. There would be Christmases here. I spoke to the maple tree and the gray sky. I said, $37,000 a year, and I had not earned a seat at their table. I did not call either of them back that night. I made dinner, something simple, pasta, with what was left in the fridge. I sat at the kitchen table where my client's file still waited for me, and I ate in the particular quiet that I had learned over 6 years of living alone. Not loneliness exactly, more like the silence that comes when you stop pretending something is other than what it is. My son showed up at my door the following evening. It was after 8 o'clock. He had driven from Guelph in the dark, which was a 2-hour round trip, and he looked like someone who had made that drive without thinking clearly about what he was going to say when he arrived. His wife was not with him. I let him in. I did not hug him. I offered him coffee, which he refused. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had done the accounting the night before. He started with anger. Said I had embarrassed them, that canceling everything without warning was vindictive, that his wife's family was already asking questions about the mortgage. I listened. I let him talk until he ran out of speed. Then I asked him a simple question. I asked whether he remembered the message he sent me on Tuesday afternoon. He said yes. He said he knew it was harsh. He said his wife had been struggling with some things and that Christmas was complicated for her and they just needed space. I asked whether he also remembered the message his wife sent afterwards, the one about earning my place at their table. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said she did not mean it exactly the way it sounded. I thought about my own father, a man from Cape Breton who could deliver a verdict in 11 words or fewer, and was never wrong, I said. She wrote it in a group chat, son, with both of us in it. In writing, things mean exactly the way they sound. He left an hour later without resolution. His shoulders had the same shape they'd had when he was 17, and had done something he knew was wrong but wasn't ready to say so yet. Some things do not change with age. I watched him back out of the driveway from the front window. Then I went to bed. I spent the following Saturday morning reviewing what I actually owned and what I had legally obligated myself to. The Subaru Forester lease was in my name. The early termination process I had initiated would take approximately 3 weeks to finalize. After that, the vehicle would need to be returned to the dealership. The phone lines had already been cut. The mortgage pre-authorization was canceled, which meant the December payment, due in 12 days, would not be made by me. Whether it would be made at all was my son's problem. The tutoring center had confirmed removal of my card. The Recreation Association had confirmed cancellation of the sports registration. I called my lawyer, a woman I had known for 15 years through a professional association, sharp and straightforward, and I told her the situation in broad strokes. She said what I already expected. I had no legal obligation to any of it. None of it had a contract with my name on it that required me to continue. The lease was mine to terminate, with fees I would absorb. Everything else was discretionary. I asked whether there was anything I should document. She said document everything. Screenshots of the messages, records of the payments, dates and amounts. "You are a chartered accountant," she said. "You already know how to do this." I did. On the Sunday I drove to Guelph, not to confront them. I drove past the house, just once, slowly. The lights were on. The Subaru was in the driveway. My son's car was behind it. There was a wreath on the door, the kind you buy at Canadian Tire, the pre-lit one, and it looked like a house where everything was fine. I drove back to Waterloo. That night, my son's wife called from her own number, not the Rogers plan that no longer connected. She had a new number. She started the call by telling me that what I was doing was cruel, that the children didn't understand why Grandpa wasn't coming for Christmas, that I was punishing them for something their parents had done. I waited until she finished. Then I said, "You told me I had to earn my place at your table. I have a question for you. What exactly was I supposed to earn it with, if not what I had already been giving?" She said that money wasn't the point. I said, "You're right, it isn't. Respect is." She hung up. 3 days before Christmas, I received a message from my sister. She is 4 years younger than me, lives in Halifax, and has the particular skill of knowing things before I tell her. She said she'd heard there was trouble. She said she hoped I was all right. She asked if I was spending Christmas alone. I told her I had made a reservation at the Wildcraft restaurant downtown for Christmas Eve and I was looking forward to it. There was a pause in the text thread. Then she sent a laughing emoji and said I was the most stubborn man she had ever loved. On Christmas Eve, I sat at a table by the window at Wildcraft and I ordered the roasted venison. Because it was not something I ever cooked for myself, and it seemed like a good day to order exactly what I wanted without consulting anyone. The restaurant was about half full, couples, a few families with older children, a table of 4 women who appeared to be celebrating something. The server was a young man from Newfoundland who mentioned it when I asked about one of the beers on the menu. We talked for about 4 minutes about the difference between Newfoundland winters and Ontario winters. Then he left me to my dinner and my view of the street. I had brought a book. I read about 40 pages between courses. The food was excellent. When I walked back to my car at 8:30 in the evening, King Street was quiet. Kitchener-Waterloo does that on Christmas Eve. Empties out, all the people absorbed into their houses and their family plans. I stood beside my car for a moment and looked at the string lights in the restaurant windows across the street. Cold, clear. That particular Canadian December cold that makes the air feel clean. I drove home. I made tea. I watched the news. My phone had been quiet all day from my son's side. Once in the afternoon, I had seen a notification from a family WhatsApp group I had muted but not left. I did not open it. Then at 9:47 that evening, a photo came through from an unknown number, my grandson and granddaughter, sitting on what I recognized as the living room floor in the Guelph house. They were in Christmas pajamas. My grandson was holding a hockey stick he'd apparently gotten early. My granddaughter was clutching a stuffed polar bear. The caption said, "They keep asking why Grandpa isn't here." I sat with the phone in my hand for a long time. I knew the photo. Not the image itself, but what it was. It was a tool. It was my daughter-in-law's hand moving pieces on a board. And my grandchildren were the pieces. They did not know they were pieces. They were 6 and 8 years old, and they missed their grandfather, and that was real. That part was not a manipulation. The choice to photograph it and send it to me with that caption, at 9:47 on Christmas Eve, that part was. I put the phone face down on the end table. I went to bed. I lay awake for a while looking at the ceiling and thinking about my grandson's hockey games, the ones I had driven to in Guelph on Saturday mornings for 2 winters. He was not a natural skater yet, still a little stiff in the knees. But he tried hard and he always looked for me in the stands, and when he did something right he would look directly at me. Not at his parents, at me. That part cost me something to let go of. The day after Christmas I called my accountant colleague, who handles estate law referrals, and asked for a good property lawyer, not my regular lawyer, someone who worked in estate and property specifically, someone I did not have a personal connection to. He gave me 2 names. I looked them up. I called the first one and left a message. His name was Reginald Vance. He called back the next morning. I explained the situation. A property, the Guelph rental, that I had been paying the mortgage on through a pre-authorized debit, not for a property I owned, but for a property my son was renting, and that I had been effectively subsidizing the rent without a formal agreement of any kind. I asked what my exposure was and whether there were any considerations I should be aware of. Vance said the same thing my regular lawyer had said, but with more specificity. No exposure, no contractual obligation, no formal tenancy agreement in my name. The landlord's issue if the rent didn't come in on January 1st was between the landlord and my son, not me. I asked about the car lease. He confirmed what I already knew. Terminating it was within my rights as the primary account holder, with early termination fees absorbed by me, which I had already accepted. He asked if I needed anything drafted. I said not yet. I said I wanted to see what January looked like first. January 1st passed. I had made my usual New Year's plans. Dinner alone at home with a good bottle of wine I had been given by a client, and the Hockey Night in Canada broadcast. Because I had been watching Hockey Night in Canada on New Year's in some form for 50 years, and I saw no reason to stop now. I did not look at my phone after 9 o'clock. On January 3rd, my son's landlord called me. He had found my number as an emergency contact on an old rental application. Not the current lease, but a previous one from 3 years ago when they first moved in. He was polite, professional. He said he had not received January's rent and wanted to know if there was a family situation he should be aware of. I said there was, briefly, and that it did not involve me in any financial capacity going forward. I gave him my son's current phone number. I wished him well. I hung up. My son called 12 minutes later. His voice was different from the December conversations. The anger had drained out of it. What was left was something closer to fear, which I recognized because I had heard it before, when he was 22, and had made a significant financial mistake, and called me at midnight to tell me. I had fixed it then, without hesitation, because he was 22. He was 34 now. He said they were behind on the rent. He said they hadn't realized how much had been coming from my accounts until it stopped. Things were difficult with work, and his wife was stressed, and could we just talk? I said yes, we could talk. I said I would meet him for coffee in Waterloo on Saturday. He agreed. Saturday came. We sat across from each other in a Tim Hortons on Weber Street because that was neutral enough and neither of us had to perform anything for a restaurant atmosphere. He had driven alone. He looked tired. The hollows under his eyes were new, or maybe I had just not let myself see them before. He apologized. Not in the careful way of someone managing a situation. More like someone who had spent 2 weeks thinking about a thing and had come to a real conclusion rather than a strategic one. He said his wife had pushed him in a direction he should have resisted. He said he had been telling himself that what I gave them was just family support, and that it didn't mean I deserved anything in particular from them in return, and that he had believed it because it was convenient to believe it. He said, "I know what you must have done when you sat down and added it all up." I said, "Do you want to know the number?" He said he already knew. He had been adding it up too, since December. We sat with that for a while. The Tim Hortons was busy. It's always busy, that particular location all day, all the time, which is something I have always found quietly comforting about this country. People just keep coming in for coffee. Life continues, I said. I'm not angry with you. I was, initially. But what I feel now is more like clarity. I should have had a conversation about this 3 years ago instead of just opening my wallet every time the subject came up. He said, "You're right." I said, "Your wife told me I had to earn my place at your table. I want you to think about what that sentence means from where I was sitting." He did not answer right away. Then he said it was wrong. Whatever she was feeling, whatever she meant, it was wrong to say it. I told him I would think about the next steps. I told him I wasn't going to make any decisions in a Tim Hortons on a Saturday morning in January. I told him to deal with his landlord and figure out what he and his wife were actually going to do, because the Subaru was being returned to the dealership on January 19th, and that was not changing. He nodded. He wrapped his hands around his coffee cup. He said, "Dad, I am sorry." I believe he meant it. I also know that meaning it and having done it are two different columns in a ledger, and that you cannot just subtract a debit because you regret it. I drove home, made lunch, called my sister in Halifax. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular, her garden plans for spring, a podcast she was listening to, her neighbor's ongoing dispute with the Strata Council, normal conversation. The kind that costs nothing and gives everything. In February, Vance called to check in. He asked how the situation was developing. I told him about the Tim Hortons meeting. He said that was a more reasonable outcome than he often saw in these cases. He said some families took much longer to get to any version of an honest conversation. I said, "Do you know what the strangest part is? I feel like I can see him more clearly now. Before, there was always this interference, the money, the expectations, the guilt. Now there's less of it and I can just see him. I don't like everything I see, but I can see it." Vance said that was probably worth something. The Subaru went back on January 19th as scheduled. A woman from the dealership came to the Guelph house to retrieve it. My daughter-in-law, from what my son told me later, stood in the driveway and watched it go without saying anything. I do not know if that silence was fury or acceptance, or something in between. That particular accounting is not mine to keep. My daughter-in-law and I have not spoken since December. I have not attempted to reach her, and she has not contacted me again. My son tells me she has gone back to work. She had been out of the workforce for 3 years, which was one of the factors that made their finances what they were. He says things are tense. He says they are in couples counseling. He says she knows that what she said was wrong. I have chosen not to have an opinion about any of that. In March, my son asked if he could bring the children to Waterloo for a Saturday, not to address anything, not to mediate, just his Saturday with them, and he thought they would like to see me. I said yes without hesitating. They arrived at 11 in the morning. My grandson came through the door and immediately wanted to know if I still had the old air hockey table in the basement, which I do, which I have had since before he was born. My granddaughter had grown at least 2 inches since the last time I'd seen her, and she'd lost a front tooth, and she showed me with enormous pride as though the tooth had been a personal achievement. We played air hockey. I made grilled cheese sandwiches for lunch, the way my mother used to make them, with sharp cheddar and a little mustard, and my grandson ate 2.5. My granddaughter asked me about the photos on the shelf in the hallway, pictures of her father when he was young, pictures of me when I was young, a picture of my own father in front of the Cape Breton house, where I spent summers as a child. She said, "Grandpa, you have a lot of old pictures." I said, "That's because I'm old." She thought about this. Then she said, "You don't seem that old." I said, "Thank you, I'll take it." My son and I did not talk about December. We talked about the hockey team he coaches on weekday evenings, a minor Adams group, something he had started doing in the fall, which I did not know about until that day. He said it was one of the better decisions he'd made recently. He said the kids were hilarious and getting better, and that it reminded him of why he'd loved hockey growing up. I said I'd like to come watch a practice sometime, if that would be all right. He said, "I was hoping you'd ask." They left at 4. My grandson hugged me at the door, that total body hug that children do, where they just crash into you and expect you to catch them. I caught him. My granddaughter waved from halfway down the front walk and then turned back to wave a second time. I stood in the doorway until they were in the car and the car had pulled away. Then I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my laptop to the spreadsheet where I had been tracking my own finances since January. The mortgage column was empty. The lease column was empty. The phone plan column, the tutoring column, the sports registration column, all empty. What remained were my own expenses, clean and precise, the numbers that added up to a life that was exactly mine. I am 64 years old. I own a house in Waterloo with a maple tree in the front yard. I have clients who trust me with their financial futures. I have a sister in Halifax who makes me laugh. I have a son who is, slowly and imperfectly, beginning to understand what he did and what it cost. I have 2 grandchildren who still look for me in rooms. I learned, in the month since December, that there is a difference between supporting someone and funding their capacity to overlook you. I had confused those 2 things for 3 years, perhaps longer. It is not a comfortable thing to recognize about yourself, but numbers do not lie. And when I finally laid it all out on paper, the column on the right told me what the column on the left had been costing. It was not money I regretted. Not really. What I regretted was the silence on my own end, the years of making the calls and signing the forms and never once saying aloud, "This is conditional on being treated like a person who matters." I know that now. I have it written in plain language in a place where I will not forget it. Outside, the maple tree has started to bud. It's the kind of late April afternoon that Ontario earns after a winter like this one. Long and gray and cold enough to make you forget that spring is actually coming. But it does come. It always does. You just have to keep the accounting honest long enough to see it.